Today we get to chat with the very talented Margaret Brown. Along with being a brilliant director, she's also quite the character. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. She earned her BA from Brown in creative writing and her MFA in film from NYU. Brown's first documentary feature was Be Here to Love Me, a film about Townes Van Sant, which chronicles the turbulent life of American singer-songwriter Townes Van Sant. She subsequently directed the documentary film The Order of Myths, a 2008 Sundance Film Festival selection about the segregated Mardi Gras celebrations of Mobile, Alabama. In 2014, Brown directed the documentary The Great Invisible, which is a film on the Deepwater Horizon oil rig explosion, as seen through the eyes of oil executives, survivors, and Gulf Coast residents who experienced it firsthand and then were left to pick up the pieces while the world moved on. It won the South by Southwest Grand Jury Prize for Documentary and received an Emmy nomination for Exceptional Merit in Documentary Filmmaking. Brown's latest documentary film, Descendant, follows members of Africatown, a small community in Alabama, as they share their personal stories and community history as descendants of the Clotilda, the last known slave ship to illegally transport human beings as cargo from Africa to America. The ship's existence, a centuries-old open secret, is confirmed by a team of marine archaeologists. The film was shortlisted for the 2023 Academy Awards, and you can watch it now on Netflix. And by the way, the film currently has a perfect 100% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. Descendant is a powerful documentary that tackles dark truths about our nation's past, about rewriting history and what it means to be a descendant, how understanding where you came from, your ancestors, your family, your community, your identity, can help you hopefully begin to heal and understand who you are today. Representation and equity are terms and topics of conversations that may feel foreign to some. It's hard to fathom the struggles of others unless you've personally experienced it yourself. But that's the beauty of documentary films. When done as masterfully as Descendant, a director can pull you into those experiences, into these communities, these lives, and help you see and feel what it's like to be someone else just for a moment. They can change us forever, giving us new perspectives and knowledge. They can make the world a better place by teaching us the ability to understand and share the experiences and feelings of another person. Empathy. They're so important. So let's jump into the conversation and learn more about Descendant from Margaret Brown herself.
I'm in New York. I live in Austin, Texas, but yeah.
What brought you to Austin? I was curious.
Well, gosh. When I graduated college, I had a lot of friends that lived there, and I was just like couch surfing there. And I remember my best friend and I, we walked into this like punk club, like rock club one night, and we were just like, we knew like everyone there, and we were just like, we're going to stay here.
So that's it?
Yeah, that's still it. And I've sort of like moved New York. I mean, I have a place in LA too. But it's always like sublet with other like doc filmmakers, which it is right now. I don't know if you've seen the film Fire of Love, but like the producer's cousin is staying there now. So it's like, keep it in the family. You know?
I love that. And, but you grew up in Alabama.
Yeah, no, I'm from Alabama. Yeah. And that's the reason like Texas, you know, cause like, I wanted to be somewhere liberal, but also the South, and Austin, and my stories are about the South, you know, and Austin, and also like I'm from a music family, and my dad's a musician, Austin's a music town, like everything about it just kind of fit, you know?
Yeah. I think you kind of have to have that in your soul. Were you born and raised in Mobile?
Yeah, I'm from Mobile.
And you said your dad was a musician. Did you grow up with him playing? Did he play gigs, or was he like playing in the house?
We had a studio in our house growing up until like a hurricane destroyed it. But yeah, my dad is a mostly country songwriter, some pop-ish stuff, but mostly country. And so I grew up like completely surrounded by musicians, like coming over all the time and recording, and going to Nashville and LA with my dad. And I was definitely like a daddy's girl, like that, definitely, because like no one else in Mobile, Alabama's dad was like my dad, you know. He was a freak. And so I mean, I'm sure there were, but I didn't know them. But so yeah, I kind of like really admired his expressions of creativity, and he really had to break away. Like I didn't really have to break away for that, but like my dad really did, you know.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine. And growing up in a storytelling household, it sounds like now it starts to make sense. And after watching Descendant, one of the things I was going to talk to you about later on was just all the music cues were just exceptional. And I could tell like it's a big part of who you are. What sort of things along the way did you pick up from your dad as far as storytelling?
Well, I remember in fifth grade, we had, this isn't really, well, so my dad, I mean, maybe this is part of my pathology and not my creativity, but I remember my dad would get these like writing assignments. Like he was part of a songwriting duo and he wrote the words and his partner wrote the music. And he had this producer, Snuff Garrett, who would call sometime and say, I need a song by tomorrow morning. Here's the hook, you know? And I remember like one of my first memories of childhood is like my dad had a lamp by his bedside on his side of the bed. And like he would knock the lamp over when he had an idea. He was like trying to write it down in the middle of the night. So I would hear like the crash of the lamp. And I would be like, oh shit, like he must have gotten a story, you know?
I love that. And I mean, and to grow up in a household where stories are being created so quickly, it really kind of frames, I think oftentimes people think a story takes a long time to create. And you learn that you can do it very quickly and see the method, the madness.
Well, I don't know if I thought that as much as my other memory that I was going to tell you was my dad, like they were like dress up like what you want to be. And I went to school with all my clothes inside out in fifth grade because I was like, I want to be a writer because my dad was so like, you know, he was such a disaster, you know, and I was like, oh, I guess that's what it is to be a writer, is just to be a mess.
I love that. So that was my next question was, what did you want to be when you grew up? So did you wanted to be a writer?
I think in fifth grade, yeah. I mean, I really idolized my dad, but I also like wanted to be a jockey, but I was like immediately too tall. Like I wanted to be a jockey in the Kentucky Derby because I really liked horses when I was little. But like by the age of like 12, I was like gigantic. So I knew that was the career that career path was taken or not for me.
Do you still ride?
No, I don't. I don't ride. I wish. I mean, I just like also like as a kid, like it's really expensive to own a horse. And I remember like that was sort of out of the budget, but I like to pet the horses a lot. And yeah, I did ride when I was little, but then I switched to a different sport. So
you earned your BA from Brown and earned your MFA in film from NYU. Impressive and bravo. When you look back at those experiences, like what was your biggest takeaway? What is something that as a director, as a filmmaker, a storyteller now, you look at something that you learned during those times?
It's so funny. Like we had like a screening at MoMA a few weeks ago and my friend Rodney like came to the screening and Rodney Evans, he's a filmmaker as well. And we went to Brown together and he reminded me of how like because the Brown apparently has all of our films like in a vault. He said, he was like, yeah, like your film is like next to Todd Haynes's like student film. And I was like, what? And he said, you know, and he reminded me of this film I made called Katrina, which I hadn't thought about in like a really long time. And we used to all like just like stay up all night and edit together. And it was really fun and collaborative. And, you know, I mean, I'm still so close to so many people I know from both Brown and NYU Film School. Brown was much more collaborative, though. I remember when I went to NYU, it was like, oh, like we're all auteur in training, you know, and that made it like really competitive. But the Brown film thing wasn't that way at all. Like we're all helping each other and staying up all night and getting really like stinky and like, you know, going to Louis in the morning, like not having slept for coffee and like, you know, very greasy eggs. And that was sort of where I fell in love with film, I think, because of that collaborative spirit.
That's incredible. Do you think that that was like, I mean, I think that's the big benefit of being able to have that experience is that network and your community, I guess, more than actually like, obviously you learn things from professors, but really it seems like you learned a lot from your community.
I mean, the fact that those bonds are still there, you know, and I don't know, it it like that just didn't, it hasn't ever gone away, like that sort of forge, I guess. And but I mean, it's kind of, when you ask that question, I think it's so many things. It's definitely not just the community. It's also like, Leslie Thornton was my teacher, and she's an experimental filmmaker, more in the narrative vein. And she just really encouraged us, like, 3-point lighting is bullshit, and drop the camera out the window and see what you get. And just like a spirit of experimentation that really felt like, when I went to NYU, that stuff was taught to us, and I had never learned it before. And I'm glad I have it. Like, that obviously, like, knowing how to light something is clearly really important. But I think to start in a place of questions rather than like, this is how you do it, it is a valuable, and because it's also a lot less fear. I mean, I think as a younger filmmaker, I was very like filled with fear that I was going to somehow do it wrong. And I would like stay up all night before a shoot, like terrified that I was somehow going to fuck up. And I don't have that fear anymore. And I feel like that's really loosened up my creativity, to like really play when I'm collaborating with like my DP and the editor and the, just whoever is in the field with me, or in the edit room, or writing. I feel just very free now, finally. And it took many years to get to that sense of freedom and experimentation. But yeah, if I was to go back to my younger self, I would say, don't be so scared.
There's a confidence when the fear goes away that you have. And
Yeah.
I think that with Descendant, you have such a clear point of view, and the abstract shots that are throughout it that help piece it together and help you feel like you're in that room in a way that I haven't experienced. Oftentimes verite filmmaking is, it's handheld. Yeah, but it's not. You have these shots that are like shot straight up from the floor to the ceiling.
Yeah.
Like, it's really, really cool. And it's things I haven't seen before. So I was so curious about that. How did this story come to, how did Descendant come to you? Growing up in Mobile, it seems like, it's tethered to who you are, but what was the initial idea?
Well, I don't know if you're aware of this, but I made a film 16 years ago called The Order of Myths. And that's how I first heard about the Clotilda, because this is my memory, right? And I'm actually making another project now about memory. And I know that memory is sometimes deeply false. So now I'm always like, well, it's my memory, but maybe this memory is wrong. But that's a total aside. But the way I remember it is, when I grew up in Mobile, I went to public school for elementary, private for middle, and public for high school. And I never remember in any of those settings studying the Clotilda. We had a whole year of Alabama history, that I can recall, and maybe even two. And I don't remember it at all. And so when my mom told me when we were shooting, she said, I think you need to know that the queen this year, Helen Meaher, her family brought the last slave ship to the United States. And she just felt like I needed to know that, and I kind of clocked it. I was kind of like, okay, because my film was about Mardi Gras. And I thought when we started, I was like, it's probably going to be about the fact that Mardi Gras is segregated, at least in part. But I mean, a film tells you what it is. So I was pretty open. And so I took in the fact of that, Clotilda, like, okay. But it wasn't until after Mardi Gras was over, when we were filming with Stephanie Lucas, who's the Black Mardi Gras queen, we were filming with her grandparents and her at their kitchen table. And her grandfather just kind of says, it's in the film. I mean, what we filmed with the moment I found out about it is in The Order of Myths. He says, we're from that ship. And Stephanie says, yeah, my people are from her people's ship. And we realized in that moment that like these two queens were connected through the Clotilda. And it was like one of those moments where the whole ground, like, I looked at the cinematographer and we didn't even say anything to each other. I looked at him and he looked at me, and I could tell he was thinking what I was thinking, was like, oh, now we have a movie,
That's incredible. How kismet. And so, I mean, they're so connected, the stories. And I think,
Yeah.
again, I think being the storyteller you are, that, I often believe that the stories are within us and then are the communities that we grow up in, and we're a reflection of those things. And so it seems like
Yeah.
there's a through line to everything you're saying. And now, even your entire body of work makes so much sense to me. Um, and that includes from like Be Here to Love Me to Descendant.
Yeah.
You've tackled things that don't necessarily have a complete story, which I think is really ambitious for a documentary filmmaker, because oftentimes there is a story that you can go research and outline before you even go start shooting. But in these instances, you're almost like an investigative journalist. You're having to go find out what are the facts, capture them,
Yeah.
and then figure out how, not only how they end, because in these cases they don't necessarily end. They're going to keep continuing going forever. So when you approach these sort of stories, how do you begin outlining and research something like this?
Well, it sort of depends on what it is. Like, I mean, I'm kind of driven by passion and what interests me. And so I just start like, with Descendant, I mean, everyone is so different. Like with Order of Myths, we just started filming. Um, and I actually, at the beginning of Order of Myths, it was supposed to be a feature. I thought it was going to be a narrative feature about my mom, who was like this sort of runaway Mardi Gras queen who married a Jew and like sort of rejected everything. But then when I was in Mobile filming, to do research, it was a research trip, and I was filming, and the way that the camera saw something that the people who were like, the camera saw truth, and what people were saying, they didn't see that truth. And like, I think that's like sort of documentary gold, when the people on screen don't understand what they're saying, but the audience does. And so I was like, oh, this is a documentary. I can't make this up. So I went back to my funder and I was like, hey, this is not this is not a narrative film. Like, I can't write these lines. Like, I think we should make a doc. So that sort of, you really have to listen. Oh my God. I don't know why no one even knows I'm in this room. Can you hold on for a second? Oh, sorry. Let me put
Absolutely.
I'm so sorry.
No problem.
I had to give me a secret network for the hotel, and it was like a whole thing.
Well, I'm glad it worked out. I'm so sorry that you had to experience that.
Okay.
But here we are.
Yeah.
And also we want to be mindful of your time. Do you have a hard out in 30? Is that about right?
I don't have a hard out, but I do have to like finish watching all the Academy movies today. So I like have to do my due diligence to Academy member.
No, I appreciate that. I think that's important. Okay, so I'll be mindful of that. So yeah, I think what the last question we were talking about is a little bit about ultimately how the story came to you.
Yeah.
We got through that, and then kind of your approach to when you approach a story like this, where it doesn't have a clear ending or a clear narrative, that how do you outline in your head, or how do you approach a story like that as you go in as a filmmaker, as a director?
I just try to be open. I try to be open to what the story tells me, because, and sometimes it's hard, because when I started this film, I thought I had this access, or so I thought, to the Meaher family that I didn't end up having. So that was like a hard pivot, because I thought, oh, like all these white families are going to talk to me about, what it means to be white in this situation. And I thought from the Order of Myths that I would have some, because I'm from there. I know a lot of white people in Mobile.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the white families would talk to me, and no one really would. The only person who spoke really was Herndon Inge, who's sort of from that sort of upper middle class or just upper class part of like Mobile. But he's like a liberal man, and, has thought about this a lot, has thought about his family's connection to slavery, and has sort of done some of the work. And I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was surprised that more people wouldn't speak to me, that there was just a sort of like silence, which now has been broken now that the movie has come out. But yeah, so I thought I had this sort of, maybe it's a laziness, but I thought, oh, this will have a similarity to the Order of Myths, but it ended up being a totally different kind of movie. And I think one thing that also shaped me early on was when I read Barracoon, and I got like obsessed with Zora Neale Hurston and started reading about her, and like really like, I don't want to say channeling her because that sounds obnoxious, but I did feel this like sort of connection to her as a female Southern storyteller and what it's like to sort of be of but not of a place. Like, she's from Eatonville, Florida, but she sort of left and went to the north and came back. And sometimes people treated her like an outsider and sometimes they didn't. And she was sort of like an insider outsider. And I've sort of always felt that way as an insider outsider. I mean, certainly not before the age of 18, but even then, like being half Jewish, I sort of felt a little other, to like the sort of like white hegemony of Mobile. Like I think like that deep connection, I realized really, really early on that she somehow would have to be woven in, and that her words and sort of the doubling back from history that seems still so present of her interviews with Cudjoe Lewis and then his words from even living in Africa as a child, like that kind of like, it's almost like this kind of like time travel, And so I knew I wanted that kind of time travel feel to be in the project.
Earlier you mentioned The Order of Myths in 2008 when I looked it up while we were in pause for a second. Yeah. But in 2008, yeah. So that was 15 years ago that this story comes to you. So in your mind, this is something you've been working on for 15 years, correct?
16 really, because it came out in 2008. I made it in 2007.
Yeah.
Not the year makes that much of a difference, but it was the 2007 Mardi Gras that we filmed.
Wow.
Yeah.
And from that point, as you're sitting with it, you start reading, you start doing some research, you start putting together the pieces, and then as you go into production, actually start making this documentary.
Yeah.
Is the idea in your mind that you just go set up some interviews and start hearing some of the folklore, the word of mouth stories? Is that the idea, or did you already have a kind of a direction at that point?
Well, I like really complicated stories. So I started filming on all these different levels. Like we started filming stuff verite, like we started filming meetings like immediately. The first thing we filmed was a verite scene. It was not an interview. We didn't do interviews for a while, kind of. And then one of the first things, we did some interviews in the first shooting round, but the very first thing we filmed was a meeting. I don't know if you know the filmmaker Bill Ross, but I couldn't, the Ross brothers in New Orleans. Yeah. Anyway, they're great storytellers too. Yeah. So Bill, I couldn't get there soon enough. So I called Bill and was like, hey, can you go to Mobile today and just film this for me? And he did.
Pretty sweet second unit.
Yeah, I know. Pretty talented technique.
Yeah.
So he and this, because there's not that many of us like Southern doc people. So yeah, we have to stick together. But so Bill came down and he shot the first day. I couldn't get there quick enough from LA. And that was when they thought they'd found the Clotilda, but it turned out to be the wrong ship. So I just couldn't get there quick enough. The meeting was happening. So he shot that first. And then I kind of came down, I think the next day or something, and started filming with like a very small development crew. But one of the first things we shot was the scene with when we were still in development. We shot the scene with Emmett in the Oakley Mansion, which is like a former plantation home.
Wow.
And which is a museum now, which is like in the South. Like why are these like places lionized? They're like basically torture sites, Mm-hmm. And so but that was something we filmed like really, really early, because I kind of knew I wanted to like Zora to be like have descendants reading Zora throughout.
Wow. What's really funny is that like I always try to piece these things back together, and I in my mind I thought that was maybe like some of the last stuff is that you picked up these shots. Wow, that's cool. I love that. It's like you're painting a picture. You start painting and putting oil down, and you're doing the narrative.
I knew like I and there was a lot of actually like pushback. Like a lot of my producers did not understand how the Zora would fit in. And I don't know if you've heard of a woman named Diane Wireman. Mm-hmm. She was like the leading light at Participant. She died last year, and she was she was my mentor and like collaborator and just executive, and we were really close. And she didn't quite get what I was doing, but she was like, but I trust you anyway. We'll like give you the money. Just keep going. And I just like, I don't think there's many executives that are like that like like, usually they're like, no, I don't get it. Like, no, you can't, that money. Cause sometimes you sort of figure it out as you're going and you're like, I need money to do this. And they're like, we don't see that. Sorry.
Yeah.
And you either have to lie and pull it from somewhere else, or you have to just forget that idea. But she had enough like foresight to be like, well, I don't get it yet, but I trust you, and like use the money for that anyway. And I just feel like, I hope, because she's gone now and she is missed in the documentary community. And I just feel like to make like really good art, like we need people who might not understand us, but still let you do it anyway. Because like, that's like sort of what makes this story, the documentary, different, and not like a straight up like verite. I mean, the story's amazing regardless, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, the part, I think one of the things that sets it apart is that it does have this element that's not strict documentary, that really does transport you through time.
100%. And it's, I loved your in memory card for her at before the titles, or for the end credits. I thought that was very sweet. I'm glad that you're right. And people need to champion the artistic approach to all sorts of film.
Sometimes you can't understand, you can't explain it in words. Like, the reason I started making films was because I couldn't explain everything I wanted to in language. Like, you have to try it. You have to like shoot it, Anyway.
Yeah. And all those pieces came together so beautifully. I loved the scenes. I loved all the gentleman. I don't know what instrument he was playing. It sounded like a banjo, but it wasn't. Down the street, and it was kind of at dusk, and it was so beautiful. I loved all the show.
No, I can't. I haven't had enough coffee yet. Fuck, what is the name of it? I'm gonna figure out. Hold on. I can't believe I can't remember the name of it. It's in the credits.
It's so beautiful.
It's Napoleon Williams. He makes those instruments himself.
Gonna need one.
Yeah,
they're so beautiful.
He'll make
I love
you
this.
one. Do you want one? Seriously, he'll
100%. I'm gonna reach out and order one.
Just send it to you. Well, anyway, I'm gonna figure out for you like what it's, and it's embarrassing to remember the name.
It's early on Monday, and we'll put it in the show notes. No, it's incredible. I love that scene so much. And then the shots. I mean, obviously the stuff inside the homes of the families, and I loved all of that. Vernetta cooking in the kitchen. I could smell the food.
Have you seen what Steven Satterfield did? Like, he did a whole little show around.
Oh yeah. I watched all those. They were beautiful. I loved all that element. I love all the elements that you wove together. The access that you had, the archival footage, were you just so elated when you're able to use some of that stuff?
I mean, you mean the Zora Neale Hurston footage that she got? Yeah, some of it I knew about like since the beginning, so it's like on the YouTube, but some of it we got like very, very toward the end, and we were like, wow, like, and it worked its way into like the very end of the film with the kid looking straight at the camera.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, she was such a good cinematographer. It's wild. And like it's really, it was really a gift. Sorry, I'm like a little bit like distracted because I'm texting everyone to be like, what the fuck is that instrument called?
No, I love it. Her footage, honestly, when I first saw it, I'm like, oh, that's cool. You recreated this footage, because the composition and all of it was so, I would say modern for lack of a better term, but I thought you recreated it. And then I was like, oh, this is actually the footage. Like, it's insane.
Yeah, it's insane. Absolutely.
I think, I said this a little bit earlier. I think we're inherently tied, our souls are tied to stories. And I think that we're constantly trying to figure out how to get our soul out there into the world. As it relates to this particular story, Descendant, what in your soul resonates in this?
How do I see my soul? You should have never asked me, because now like I'm asking like everyone I know. It's called an accounting, but I don't think that's what it is. It's not an accounting. Sorry.
No, I love it.
Now I'm like distracted because I'm texting like Kern and Ray, the composer, Mike, the editor, because like, yeah. Oh my God, Ray just texted me back. I'm not sure it's the name. It's his own creation, but Mike will know because Mike is my editor. I have two editors, but Mike finished the film with me, and he's also a musician. He's in that band, The War on Drugs. I don't know if you know that band.
Yes.
Yeah, he played guitar in that band.
How funny.
And,
our paths crossed very briefly in Vancouver.
Really? Yeah. Well, he
Yeah.
actually couldn't go on tour with them because he got he got COVID when we were in post production with from the sound designer. So
Oh
he
no.
didn't go on tour. Well, our other composer, Rhiannon Giddens, do you know her work?
No.
Like, so she's amazing, and you should definitely check her out. Like Ray and Rhiannon were the two main composers, and this guy named Dirk Powell also did some stuff with Rhiannon. But Ray, I was mostly in the studio with, and Rhiannon, like in the film, like I think in the first 10 minutes, it's mostly Rhiannon. There's some Ray, but like she's basically playing. It's not even. It's like a proto banjo from 1860. Like that, we would be on YouTube, but she was in Ireland, and she would just pick it up and like play along to the movie, and I'd be like, when you listen to her music, you'll understand. Like she's like definitely channeling from another place.
Yeah. Oh, and that's this. I had this whole section of the score in the film because you use a variety of sounds. You use classical music, you use the banjo, you use African sounds to kind of like throughout it. And so it makes sense that there's so many thoughtful people involved, that you're the maestro helping.
Yeah. No, like there was a moment where like we were kind of in a crunch, and I sort of knew I wanted some elements from Rhiannon and I wanted some elements from Ray. And I went to both of them because they're both like pretty, like Ray's in the roots and Rhiannon's, you'll see, she's amazing. And I was like, and like everyone was like, Margaret, you can't ask both of them to be composers. They're going to say no. And they both said yes. They both like watched the film and were like, yes. And I was like, thank you. Like, I just thought like there's someone helping me from somewhere else because I knew that like also with the time that we had, it was too much work for one person. So like they both were like, just were egoless and we're like, we'll contribute whatever we can. It was pretty impressive.
You have a lot of moving pieces in your work. You're very thoughtful about all the elements, and again, something that you've been working on for 16 years. How do you, as you're in the middle of it, like say, I don't know, 5 years ago, how are you sorting all the information you've taken in and keeping it organized? Do you have a system? Do you use handwritten notes?
I meditate. Because I think if you're not centered, I don't always meditate. I go in and out of that practice. But I think like you have to maintain some kind of stillness within yourself because it's really overwhelming. And you have to sort of filter out people that are distracting, who are taking your energy. And, you have to have a lot of silence around you and people that are going to hold you up and not tear you down. Because I think that's why I'm sort of really happy I'm not in a fear place anymore, because like, this is probably maybe too heady, but during the process, I was making another TV show kind of in the middle of all this because I sort of needed more money. And also I was approached by something that was sort of hard for me to say no to. I was super interested in it. And it was real. I thought the timing was going to be okay, that I could like go do it. But then we sort of found the Clotilda right when that project was shooting.
Wow.
Yeah. And I had to and I've never been that anxious in my life. It was like all the fear stuff came back and I had to go on like antidepressants for like years, at that point. I just got off of them. And I realized like, you might not use any of this, but it is related to
mental health is a big deal for me. So like, I appreciate you sharing this story. I know it's a very thing. I think I try to talk about it regularly throughout the episodes, but no. So please.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. I didn't know. So, I realized like I'd been living in like this weird fight or flight thing like my whole life and not really known it. Like, cause like once I started taking the antidepressants, I realized, well, actually it's anxiety. And cause when that went away, it like freed up this part of my brain that I didn't even know you could have access to. That's like a calmer place that you can live in that I just didn't even know was there, It was like amazing. And now I'm off the antidepressants. I think I just sort of had to know that you could reach that, that it was even like a place. Does that make sense?
100%. No,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I think that until you know it's there, you don't know how to get to it if you don't even know it exists. Like your conscious needs to know that it's available.
Yeah.
And then once you know it's available, I know how to, sometimes it's a journey to get back to it and you fight to get there, but sometimes, but at least you know where to go.
Yeah.
And I think most creatives, I think a lot of creatives, I think so much of what a storyteller is kind of, you hope that by telling a story, you can remove some of this anxiety.
Yes.
That we create to help us find calm, and our nervous energy goes to writing, to painting, to like fidgeting with things. And I think storytellers, especially in documentaries where there isn't a path, where you have to really noodle on an ideal and sit with it for a long time, can become an obsession and become overly anxious. Where like, I can't crack this. Is it me? And then the fear comes in, and it's a whole thing. I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's important, and I think it makes other people feel that, I'm not different. This is.
Well, I mean, and also that's not to say the fear like is away permanently. Like it's just that like I'm not in it constantly.
Yeah. And I mean, for me personally in my career, I used that anxiety as a way to push myself, and I thought it was a cool thing.
Yeah.
And then as I got older, I'm like, oh my God, like I wanted to feel that adrenaline of anxiety. If I wasn't pushing myself hard enough, is what I told myself. And then like, that's all insane. I could still achieve those same things as a calm person. And so, no, it's been a journey for me as well, personally. When you look back at the post-production process of this, where I think oftentimes documentaries, the magic happens in post sometimes. And you're really finding the story sometimes. It depends, obviously. But how long were you in post on this project?
On and off, like throughout, kind of. We would like edit for a while and take some time off, then edit more. Yeah, it's definitely called an accounting. AKONTING.
Okay. I'll make a note of that. Okay.
Yeah.
You're gonna need one of those. Thank you for hunting that down for us.
But yeah, you were asking about the post process. Mm-hmm. We were in it on and off for years. But there was like Jeff Richman was like the main post editor for a long time, and then Michael Block, who I was talking about before, came on and really like worked on it for like the last 8 months and finished it with me. And yeah, I mean, I've worked with Jeff, worked on Order of Myths as well. He was the finishing editor on that. And I think Mike was definitely like more than a finishing editor on this. And I would say Jeff was too, to be honest. Like I edited a lot of Order of Myths along with Michael Taylor, myself, but they both like, so much of them is in both, like of Jeff is in both films. And Mike is definitely like very poetic in his approach. We met at a cocktail party, and he edited a short I did, and he was a really new editor. He's a musician, and I really thought his work on the short was incredible. And he was so meticulous in a way that like, I mean, more so than me, which is pretty insane because I'm pretty anal, but I was like, wow, like he is really detailed, and sometimes it drives me crazy, but mostly I like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I would say the post process was deeply emotional and also pretty open. Like we were pretty open to trying new things. I was very present in the edit, but also sometimes just would give Mike time by himself. With Jeff, it was during the height of COVID, so I wasn't able to I don't think I was even with him one day in the edit room. Wow. But because we've worked together on so many projects, I think we've done 4 long-term projects together that like, and some of them have been like TV things and like so shorter, but like still like we sort of share a brain. So it's like we have a shorthand. So it wasn't too problematic that like, that he wasn't there. And also he could edit from home. He had like a newborn during this. So it's like, sometimes there'd be like a lot of screaming going on in the background, but it worked,
Yeah. And when you talk about the detail of being meticulous, are we talking like nudging something a frame or moving something a split second? Like how in the process?
That as much as like a lot about, I think sound is something that is really underappreciated. And I mean, my first film is a music film, and I'm from a musical family, and I sort of feel things inside myself. I mean, on the Towns movie, sometime if I couldn't explain to the editor, like because I could hear it in my head, you know, and I would be like, just let me edit the sound part. Like I can't explain it. Like, just give me the keyboard, you know. And with this film, I did not do that. Like, Mike and Jeff are both like, and I think now I'm better at explaining myself too.
Right.
That's how I learned how to make a movie. Hopefully I've learned a few things in 17 years, but because Mike's a musician and Jeff is also really good with music. They both are. Like, the issue with Jeff sometimes as an editor is he picks temp track that's so good and so perfect. Like the fact that like Rhiannon and Ray like could make something better than the temp track is kind of like, I think that sounds obnoxious, but it's like, because Jeff was so good, like sometimes we'd be like, oh, we're never gonna do better than this Philip Glass he just threw in. Like, that's not gonna, it fits so perfectly, you know.
Yeah.
But sure enough, you know,
Wow.
it works.
That's incredible. And yeah, I think that, you know, musicians are incredible editors. I think they hear
Oh my God.
and see things differently. And you know, one of the notes I had here after watching it was that Descendant is that it's a music. I mean, for me, the music, it was like a long music video. Like I loved.
Oh wow. Yeah.
There was obviously the powerful and social critique and the powerful social messaging and the review of critique of society. But like watching it and the visceral reaction I felt throughout it, just from like the creative tones, it's stunning. Like like everything's, there's not a thing out of place. And so from like a creative standpoint, it's just a beautiful piece of art as well as a important story.
Thank you.
Of course. I watched an interview that where you mentioned, I think it was on The Order of Myths, that, and you kind of just in the middle of your answer to this in this interview, you said like, oh, I was camera operator, was doing this, and I was doing sound. Do you do sound regularly? How many roles do you typically play? Okay.
I mean, I know how to do everything, you know. I know I don't shoot as much anymore because I don't know. Actually, it's funny. Like so Justin, who's like Zach and Justin both shot this, Zach Manuel and Justin's wife act. And Justin has been like shooting this experimental thing in New York, just going every day by himself to this one place and like shooting this thing. And he's been using this like tiny little camcorder that captures 4K and like is really good. And he's like, Margaret, you got to get one. And I haven't shot in a long time, you know, because I do like to do this thing where I'm very like connected to the person that I'm in, so I can be like so fully present. I don't like to be behind a camera because I don't think I can be fully present. It's like a connection thing. And but I do miss it. Like I came up as a DP. I like I didn't come up, I didn't like shoot professionally ever as a DP really. But in film school I was on the DP track, and I think like yeah, that was like sort of, I always saw things rather than could talk about them. And so, you know, I miss that. And so I just bought this I mean, it's on back order. So it's like this special little, and he sent me all these images he shot on it. And it's just like, because I shot some of the film, but I didn't give myself a credit because most of my shots are like out of focus and terrible. And I was like, I don't want to take away from like the actual DPs of this movie.
Right.
Who, you know, I was just sort of like, sometimes I wanted to shoot and that would just be B cam or whatever, or I would like set up the second camera if we had two cameras and be the second shooter, but I am not the cinematographer, you know. But I do kind of want to like go back into that. With sound, it was more like necessity. Like I don't really like doing sound, but sometimes if you're in a situation where someone's really nervous or you feel for whatever reason that you're going to gain something from being just two people or just one person, that's when it's really good to know how to do everything, because you can just be like, okay, I'll just shoot it, you know. Because most people, like sometimes you have to pivot, you have to be able, like sometimes your crew is gigantic and other times it's just you. Like you have to know when to grow and when to, and just like you have to know what to wear to the interview, you have to know like how to make people feel comfortable or sometimes uncomfortable, you know. So it's always like a process of like adapting to what the film tells you it is, you know? Yeah.
As someone you reach out to be a partner in this project, what was it about Questlove that you maybe admired or something that you thought he was a good fit?
I mean, I reached out to him because he was a Descendant. He's Joycelyn's cousin. Also, like, I mean, obviously know his work, and I interviewed him. I did a Q&A with him for Summer of Soul, like I guess now like a year and a half ago, and that's how I met him. So that's sort of when he came on. Like, no, it was longer than that ago. I can't remember, but I brought him onto the project when I knew that like he's a celebrity, so I had like one shot, and I could have reached out to him earlier, and I'd been talking to his manager, but like we never sent any footage, because I was afraid he would say no. So I waited till like, I was like, oh, I feel like we're in a spot where he'll probably say yes, and he did. His team came on, and it wasn't just him, it's also Black Thought and Sean, his manager, and Sarah Thelman, who runs the company. But Amir has been so involved, like much more so than I thought he would be. Like he gave notes, and he hooked us up with Ray, and before we finished the film. But then the way he's been involved, like after, with the impact, and coming to Africatown, and like bringing his whole family, and like being on text threads with the community and me, like I'm like, he's really in it with us. And I think, I don't know, I wasn't expecting the level of passion he would bring to it, but it's his family. Like, if you read what if he feels it so deeply, and it makes sense. It's his long lost family, so he's learning about his family, and I think, that sort of, I don't really know what to say about it. I mean, it's been really powerful.
I love to hear it. I've got chills. I love hearing that. I love the thoughtfulness that he brings to it. That's really beautiful.
Oh my God. Yeah. I don't know if you've watched any of the Q&As he's done, but like it's very, his words are very powerful around this.
Yeah. And I can see why. The connection, the connective tissue there is beautiful.
Yeah. When
you look back at this project, what was your biggest challenge?
I think my whiteness was the biggest challenge, because I like, when I realized at a certain point, like, oh my God, like I thought this was a story kind of just like, I heard Stanley Nelson speak like years ago, and he was talking about how white people, there's this history and documentary of white people telling Black stories, and white people should tell stories about whiteness. And in a way, like that is part of what sort of wanted me to tell this story, because I thought I had access to like insights about whiteness in the South. But of course, obviously, that's not what the story ended up being. But that's like, I was very inspired when he said that. I was like, okay, well, now I know what my work is, And but then you have to listen to what a film is. And the film, the white people didn't want to talk to me. The Black stories that were passed down over 160 years they kind of crowded everything else out. Like these were like master storytellers, and to not acknowledge the power of their message and their truth would be like, I wouldn't be that. It just wasn't. That was not where the story should. It was clear that was the story, at a certain point. And so, I was already working with Kern Jackson. He'd been embedded in the community for 25 years since he wrote his like dissertation in grad school. And he's the one who shot all the videos you see in the film, or a lot of them that are sort of in the tradition of Zora Neale Hurston. I mean, he basically went to grad school studying the fieldwork of Zora Neale Hurston, and he's very much in that tradition. But then S.E. Chambers, who was a friend of mine that I knew first as a writer, we met at a writing colony, but she was also like an exec at BT for years, an exec at Nickelodeon, like produced a bunch of docs. And so as friends, we started talking about like, not just about my whiteness, but just about the story of the Clotilda. And we would meet for coffee or drinks, and I would tell her. And then she sort of started like unofficially, she's Black, and she started, we started just like talking about it. And at a certain point I was like, I should bring Essie on as a producer. Like she's basically producing already, And Kyle Martin, who's my longtime producer, I went to him and I was like, I want to introduce you to this woman. Like, she's a good friend of mine. And, I think she is a producer. I think we should bring her on. Like, she's sort of helping me with my blind spots. And also, we were such good friends that there was like, we kind of made a pact that like we would be like brutally honest with each other, even if it was painful. And, most of the time it wasn't, but sometimes it was. And there were definitely things as a white person that I missed that the film just wouldn't have been as powerful. It would have been more for the white gaze than for everybody if I had just been like, oh, I don't need any help. I'm an auteur,
Right.
Like
Yeah.
for this one, like I was like, oh, you got to be humble to the story. You got to be humble to like what your blind spots are. And I tried to be humble.
That's really incredible. When you look at this journey that you've been on, what advice would you give yourself? And you kind of said it early on about the fear side. So I'm curious, I was just confirming that your first answer was accurate, because I have the second question. If you went back to your younger self, would that be the advice you would give?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like lean into curiosity more and less into fear. Like, well, maybe why are you afraid? Like just go deeper. Like always go deeper. Like always. I mean, I sound like, I don't know. I feel like I am not talking in a practical way on the sort of like bullet points, but it is a practical way, really, because it's like if you interrogate yourself and your feelings, and like, operate from a place of like calming the mind down to think about, well, where, if I'm in a place of stillness, like what do I hear, rather than like if I'm in a place of anxiety, I'm just going to do the impulsive thing. Like that's sort of what I would tell myself, is to try to find the stillness before reacting.
I love it. Pull quote found for the interview. I love that so much. Two last questions. What makes a good story?
Well, I wanted to say one more thing about that, like to kind of acknowledge a teacher, Lee Daniel, who was Rick Linklater's like first DP and who shot Be Here to Love Me, the Towns movie. And I mean, I started that movie when I was in school still. And I was a very impatient person. And he was always like, you got to just wait for the shot. You got to just wait for it to happen, wait for it to unfold in front of you. And I mean, it's just sort of more like, wait, you have to be patient. You have to be patient. And sometimes things happen quick. And I'm kind of an adrenaline kind of person just naturally. So for me, the impulse is never to slow down. It's always a fight to slow down. But like, I think that's the place that's the most rewarding, is when you do, like, you notice things, you see things. You don't see them if you're going at warp speed,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the best advice I think one can have, is to be patient. I wrote no joke, 5 days ago, a whole thought piece around being patient.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah, that's so funny. And time. I'm fascinated. When you said earlier talking about memory, I've been fascinated with memory and time for most of my career. And
really?
And I roll mind into consciousness and then how that reflects against time, because I think time is the thing that hinders most people in modern society, is that we're constantly putting ourselves up against an imaginary force that doesn't exist. And patience, I mean, the moment you remove time, all you have is patience, right? So that's so cool. So what makes a good story?
What makes a good story? I have no idea. I don't think there's like one common thing that makes a good story. That question is unanswerable. Sorry.
I love it. And I think that's the best answer to have. By the way, while doing my research, I did discover Be Here to Love Me, your Towns Van Sant doc. And I ordered the DVD on Saturday.
Oh, you could find a DVD?
I found a DVD going for $55. So just so you know, I mean, there's a premium.
Well, you're about to re-release it. That's why it's not in release right now. Oscilloscope's about to re-release it. It's going to be in theaters.
No way. Well, I'm so excited. Yeah. So I became probably like 3 or 4 years, probably 5 years ago now, I became obsessed with Towns Van Sant. And somebody asked me 6 months ago, who's my favorite storyteller? And I said, Towns's. And I said,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And I've always been drawn to singer-songwriters because I think that I think they're very raw and honest storytellers. And Town Story is obviously very difficult and tragic. And I was curious, as we started the conversation, you telling me about your dad, it makes sense I was like, how did Towns, was there an influence there? How did Towns get onto your radar?
So, when I was in school, I lived in so I moved into Pavement moved out, and we moved into this loft in Williamsburg. And their manager was this guy, Sam Brumbaugh, and he lived. I'm forgetting the name of the drummer, but he like it was like three of us. It was like this very open loft, and Sam like played me a Towns record, and I hadn't heard him growing up. Like my dad had never. My dad knew who Towns was, but like my mom threw out my dad's. One time, my dad went on a fishing trip, and my dad had a literal room that all it was records. Like it was like the room outside of the studio, and you would pull out these drawers, and it was just record. I mean, thousands of records, first editions of Bob Dylan, like insanity, and and that happened like when I was in high school or before, and like I think like 6 months later when I was in college, I was like, Dad, and it was all gone. It was all the Salvation Army, you know, and because my mom is always like trying to downsize and like be minimal, and like my dad is like a hoarder, you know, it's like this constant battle. But that's like the one thing I'm like, really, you threw out the fucking first editions, like
Yeah.
I think he just kept like a few Bob Dylans and some Odetta and like Chris, and I was like, oh my God, like who knows what was gone. And when I was in high school, I was definitely more into like alternative, like punk. Like I didn't know what was there. Like I was just like, that's like lame, you know?
Yep.
So Sam played me Waiting Around to Die. And I was just like, oh my God, what is this? You know, we're just like sitting in this loft with no heat, and he was playing that song, and I was very young, and I had this thought of like, because my dad he was a songwriter, and you know, and then there's a whole story there, but of how that came to happen because it's very unlikely, and he was a songwriter, but my mom always wanted to stay in Alabama because she was very close to her grandmother and she wanted me to know my great grandmother. So we never moved to Nashville. We never moved to LA. Like, and there were lots of opportunities for my dad to do that, but he paid a price in like what jobs he could get, you know, and we had a solid family life growing up because of that. And a lot of his partners did not. And there was a lot of like drug over, you know, I mean, who knows, who knows what would have happened, you know, but like, I think, in my mind, it's kind of a questioning artistic younger person. I was like, do you have to live that way to be an artist? To be as great as Towns, do you have to like, you know, just like hit the road, not really be tied to anyone? Do you have to do that? And you know, the other thing, like he was an alcoholic, and I guess like now, many years later, I see that as sort of the more, and you know, not ever been an alcoholic myself, but definitely being alcoholic adjacent, let's say, like, I think that's the most key thing. It's not about like, again, it's like, I think the art flows more freely, usually when you're in a flow state and not blocked by something like alcoholism or fear or exhaustion or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
So like, but I thought as a younger person, that was like the question of that movie, like what's the right state to be in to be an artist, you know? And I think there's been like every year I have like a different revelation about that. But that film was the beginning of that exploration. Like, well, shit. Like, and it's also this male myth of like, you know, artistic genius that comes with torture, which is such fucking horse shit. I couldn't, it makes me angry. Because I think there is this cult of the boy genius that we see today in documentary, in every kind of endeavor. It's like, it's always these like men that like, you know, there's a myth there that's somehow rooted in our subconscious or something, but it's not, to me, where the flow comes from.
No, I think you're totally right. I'm very into records, and to hear that these archives are no longer in your family's possession is tragic. During COVID, one of my projects I've been collecting records for 20 years, and I built a hi-fi system, like a listening room in this house in Tulsa.
Oh my God, amazing.
It's amazing. And one of the things I do regularly is I'll put on the Towns, that live recording 1975 from Austin.
Old Quarter.
Yeah.
Old Quarter's Houston. Old Quarter's actually not Houston. It's, where's the Old Quarter? It's in Galveston. The old
Oh,
quarter.
is it really? Okay.
Yeah, you've got to go to the old quarter.
I have to.
I mean, I'm seriously, like, I'm telling you, this is a pilgrimage you will not regret.
Gonna go. I promise you, I will do this.
Oh, Rex, I sent you.
Tell Rex. I'm okay. Hold on. I need to make that note of that, Rex. But
Rex
in it,
Bell.
one of the things that and it's obviously one of his most commercial songs, but Poncho and Lefty, and that song I listened to, and what I found fascinating as him as an artist, and that song is one of my favorite songs of all time. Wow. Hearing it live is so different than the studio recording.
Oh my God. I know the studio. Yeah. A lot of the studio stuff of Towns is like tragically bad, like way too many flutes. Like,
yeah.
Not it.
But when you hear it live, you can hear him coming through the microphone. You can hear the pain in his voice. He's not a good singer, and it's beautiful. It wouldn't be. I don't think it'd be as good if he was like this, great, incredible vocalist.
Yeah.
And there's something like that juxtaposition of the guitar and his old timey swagger, I guess. That song crushes my soul. Like, I don't know what it is. I just love it. But I'll put in the hi-fi system, turn off all the lights, and just listen to it, and you can hear every finger hit the chord or whatever. Yeah. It's so beautiful. Oh, okay. Well, you got to go. I have one question before you leave, though. What is your comfort food when you're having a bad day? This is what I ask every guest at the end of the podcast. When you're having a bad day, what's the one meal that comes to mind that could make it a little bit better?
Oh my God. I mean, I have a sort of sideways answer. I've been on the road so much lately, and I went home for Christmas to see my folks and my brother, and I haven't been able to cook in like months, nothing. And so I cooked every meal for everybody for the whole time I was there. My mom was so shocked. Let's just say I'm not known in the family as a cook at all. People make fun of me, but like I got that New York Times app, and like I had bookmarked all these things on the road that I wanted to cook, that I wanted to try, because like there was something about making food for other people, and also like this sort of little piece of art you could make that you could do it quickly and it gives people joy. And I was like, so really, like, my comfort food is like cooking for other people. I suddenly found out. I didn't know that until Christmas. Interesting. What was your of that experiment, I guess? What was your favorite dish that came out of it? My dad can't. He's like allergic to milk. So I found this recipe, actually not from the New York Times, from this other like website it was like this ratatouille recipe that like I used to bake vegan cheese, which I'm sure is gross and processed, but my dad could eat it. And I made this vegan ratatouille, and my parents just went crazy over it. Like my mom was like harassing me to send her the recipe, and I couldn't find it. I couldn't figure out where I'd gotten it and then I was like, oh, I found it. I was so happy. So I think that was my biggest hit, was the vegan ratatouille. I love it. That's incredible. It's funny. Again, like the two things I'm personally fascinated by, instruments, music, and food, and how it's all moved along through the world through whether it's colonization or forced migration or whatever it is. And I have found that directors often become obsessed with food at some point in their careers. Really? Yeah, and I think it's because it's something about I don't know whether they discovered the storytelling aspect of food and how it can impact a room and how it can impact a space. Yes. That there's something really powerful about presenting a story through something that we can all enjoy and have a conversation around. Well, you've seen High on the Hog, right? Like I mentioned Stephen Satterfield earlier, but he saw Descendant and like pitched doing a series with Miss Burnetta. It's so good. You have to check it out on YouTube. It's like he came. Yeah. I don't know. It's just really fun to see her. Like she got her makeup done by this like great makeup artist, and she was feeling like real pretty, and and she's very bossy, and it was just really fun to watch her boss Steven around instead of me. So that was cool. I love that. And before I could actually watch this, and before it was out, I in the town had heard about this the series of this food, because everyone food's a very big deal to me. Yeah. Like, you're gonna have to watch this thing. It's going to come out in alongside it as a companion piece. And I was like, I cannot wait to watch it. And I did, and they're incredible. So it's amazing. Like, I feel like Descendant it's bigger than a documentary. It's I don't know, part of folklore. It's part of mythology. Story. Yeah, no, part of a much larger, I wouldn't say mythology because the story's true. Oh, right. Correct. Yes. But but it is like part of a folkloric tradition, certainly. But whenever people say mythology, I always want to say that's what white people say about the Clotilda,
you're
but
right.
everyone in the Black community knew that it was really a ship.
Yeah.
There's a fucking log at the museum. Like, there was a ship. Like, there's a log in the genealogy museum in Mobile, Alabama, and people were still denying that, even though there's a captain's log there. Well, it could have been forged. Yeah, it could have been forged, but I don't know. I mean, when you think about like who got to tell the story in 1860 when it was written, let's talk about forgery. Let's talk about like who had control of the narrative, and that's what makes oral history like so powerful,
Yeah, and I think that's what is such a great conversation. I know documentaries are the best tool is to start a conversation, and to your point that even when you start the conversation saying how in Mobile that the white families are now talking about it because it's not mythology, it's fact. Here's a comprehensive someone that's taken all the stories, put them into one thing, and let's have a conversation around it. And so incredible work. What do you want people to, when they watch it, what do you hope that they walk away with?
I hope they walk away with like, first of all, inspiration of the resilience of this community, and like thinking about their own ancestors and the stories that are either painful or that they're proud of. And, I mean, the Obamas came on after Sundance, and Michelle Obama started this thing last week called the Descendant Challenge, along with Participant, who's the studio I made the film with. And they also always do an impact campaign, with every film, which is why I wanted to work with them. But, I don't know if you follow the hashtag Descendant Challenge on Instagram or Facebook or, any social channel, you'll see like these people posting stories of their family. And like, if you ever want to lift yourself out of a bad mood and be inspired, like, follow this hashtag, but seriously, follow the hashtag. I mean, I've been, it does help me when I'm feeling down to like look at like these stories of like what people have to go through and how they prevail. And I think I also want people, when they watch the film, to be inspired to act. Like, one thing Anderson Flint says in the movie is like, sometimes, art can be perceived as a form of entertainment, but what do you do when you leave? And he says this in front of EJI, which is like the lynching memorial in Montgomery, which is a very powerful site of a lot of pain, but it's also very, what do you do with this? Now that you have this new information, now that your worldview has shifted, what do you do now? And I think my challenge to people is like, how are you going to act to make the world a better place? Like, now that you know that history, in a real way, how history has been silenced, like, how will this, and it can be little ways that you act, like, but I just hope people like walk away with some kind of brain shift.
I love it. What a way to go out on that episode. Thank you so much, Margaret.
It's a really fun conversation.
Thank you. I really, and I know that you have a lot going on right now, so I'm so happy we're able to do this. It was such a pleasure to get to chat with you a little bit, and I wish you the most success over this campaign, and as getting this out to the world.
Conversation. You're a really good interviewer, and you asked a lot of. I mean, I've been asked a lot of questions, and these are really like kind of. It was fun to kind of like riff off of your questions. Well,
good. I'm so glad that we could have that conversation, and thank you for making the time to do this. It really means a lot. Time's really precious to all of us. So thank you so much. And I can't wait to keep in touch when I go down to Galveston and check out.
Oh, you have to let me know.
Deal. What a delight. Thoroughly enjoyed that conversation. I hope you did as well. But I have a few notes before we get out of here. One of my favorite moments from this conversation was actually when Margaret called me out for using the word mythology. In my mind, in real time, I was thinking of stories told through oral history, which is simply just folklore. Mythology, on the other hand, is a story, one concerning the history of people or explaining some other natural or social phenomenon, typically involving supernatural beings or events. And here's the kicker. They're widely held, but false in belief or idea. The more you know, I'm so grateful. Also, the instrument that we were discussing is the akonting. Napoleon Williams, who plays the instrument in the film, makes them himself. I'll put a link to his Instagram in the show notes. You got to see them. They're beautiful. Margaret references the Descendant Cookout, a short series on YouTube by Participant Media and Steven Satterfield. Steven sits down with activists, thought leaders, and subjects of the documentary Descendant to explore how food impacts community, social justice, and cultural legacies. We'll put a link to that in our show notes. Quick note about Participant Media. They do a social impact campaign with all their films, one of the many reasons we love them. such a thoughtful and purpose-driven production company. And that's a wrap. Thank you for checking out our latest episode, and please go watch Descendant. It's streaming on Netflix right now. You can check out our Instagram at Smith Society Pod for the latest news, and don't forget, we will have some live events planned for the summer, so stay tuned. Finally, the best way you can support the Smith Society Podcast is to rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow your dreams no matter where they take you.